Mr. Ambassador, sir, ladies and gentlemen, a good evening and welcome to NUSS Meet the Ambassador series. I'm Dr. Fong from the NUSS Toastmasters Club. I'm delighted to be your MC tonight. It's our honor to have with us the Honourable Kirk Wagar to speak on the topic of celebrating 50 years of partnership between the United States of America and Singapore. To start the evening proper, may I now invite Mr. Eddie Lee, NUSS President, to deliver his welcome speech. Mr. Lee, sir.
Good evening, Honourable Mr. Kirk Wagar, Ambassador of USA to Singapore, friends, guests, fellow NUSS members. Welcome and thank you for attending the NUSS Meet the Ambassador series with Ambassador this evening. You know, the committee was debating whether to have this dialogue before or after the US election. So I'm glad that the Ambassador has spoken today, as I'm sure that the audience will have some questions to ask you about the two candidates. Now, just a background, the Meet the Ambassador series was first so used to be in the grassroots. Meet the Ambassador series was first introduced in 2009. The series aims to forge closer ties between NUSS and foreign community in Singapore, providing members with a better understanding of the local and foreign perspective. It also provides a forum for ambassadors to share their views on foreign policies and stimulate discussion on issues concerning foreign relations and global development. The US Ambassador is our 13th foreign dignitary that the NUSS had the privilege and pleasure of inviting to speak to our members. As the Dr. Fong has said, this year marks the 50th year of diplomatic relations between Singapore and US. And we had a historic visit by our Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong to the White House in August this year. Well, our two countries have shared a comprehensive relationship with productive cooperation on economic, political, and security issues over the years. This is evident in the various joint meetings and dialogues that have taken place, such as the Strategic Partnership Dialogue, which introduces new mechanisms to strengthen partnership and cooperation between the two countries. Tonight, the Ambassador will also examine and give insights on the impact of diplomatic leadership between two countries, and not just talk about the US presidential election. Well, we have maintained very close bilateral ties over the years, and US is the top foreign investor in Singapore. And I believe that tonight's dialogue will be interesting, informative, and insightful. And I wish all of you a pleasant and enjoyable evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eddie Lee. Now I'd like to invite Mr. Jeffrey Khoo, Chairperson of NUSS Intellectual Pursuit Subcommittee, up on stage to introduce the Honourable Kirk Wagar. Mr. Khoo, please.
Good evening, fellow NUSS members, Ambassador. A little bit introduction of Ambassador Kirk Wagar. I've actually also done a little bit of internet searches, so I'll add that part at the end of this. Ambassador Kirk Wagar was born in the United States, Ambassador to the Republic of Singapore on September 4th, sworn in as the United States Ambassador to Singapore on September 4th, 2013. A lawyer by training. Previously, he was a managing partner of Wagar Law, PA, a Miami-based law firm that focused on contract and insurance litigation. He served on the Sub-Saharan Africa Advisory Committee at the Exim Bank in 2010, and on the full Exim Bank Advisory Committee for the 2011 and 2012 terms. Now, the Ambassador was the Florida Finance Chair for President Obama and a trustee of the inaugural committee in both 2009 and 2013. He also served as Florida Finance Chair for the Democratic National Committee for John Kerry's 2004 presidential campaign. Ambassador Kirk Wagar has been a member of the boards of American Association for Justice, the Florida Justice Association, and the National Collegiate Conference Association, which is parent of the National Model United Nations and an NGO of the UN. Mr. Wagar received a BA from Robert Wesleyan College and a JD from the University of Miami. As all of you know, that our Prime Minister has also met President Obama. So an opportune moment for a quote from US President Obama is this, as he said during the meeting. Half a century ago, when Singapore was an island of villages and crowded tenements, few would have imagined a day like today, but Singapore prides itself on being a little red dot. A little red dot on many maps, but with a very big impact on the world. In less than a generation under the vision and stewardship of Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, Singaporeans transformed their nation from third world to first. Let us now welcome Ambassador Kirk Wagar to give his keynote speech on the 50 years of Singapore-US partnership. Ambassador, please.
Good evening, everyone. So in the U.S., we make you participate a little bit. If you're going to have to ask me about our election, I get to have some fun too. So good evening, everyone. All right. Thank you all for coming out. It's a great privilege to be here. I was saying when we took the picture of the organizing committee that I always love speaking at schools that I know I couldn't get into, even today. So it's an honor to be here. It's also an honor to be invited to participate in the NUSS Ambassador Dialogue Series, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with the alumni, students, and faculties this evening. I know you have a lot of questions, especially on the future role of the United States in Singapore, and more broadly the region, and I'm looking forward to our discussion tonight. If you haven't heard, I am candid to a fault, and as I was mentioning earlier, I only have 3 months left in the job, so what are they going to do to me? So I hope that you will ask any question on your mind, and I will do my best to truthfully answer that. But before we talk about what lies next for us, I'd like to spend a few moments talking about the long, proud history we have within our partners here in Singapore. As you heard and know, this year we commemorate the 50th anniversary of formal diplomatic relations between the United States and Singapore. We celebrate the progression of our relationship over the years, which more and more has found us collaborating on a host of international priorities, not just bilateral. From preserving stability and security in this region, combating climate change, to raising trade standards to ensure free, fair, and open markets, and a better way of doing business, the United States and Singapore and our interests are increasingly intertwined. And we believe the region will be better for that. We have a unique, energetic relationship with origins that goes back nearly 2 centuries. U.S. engagement in Singapore began with economics, when Singapore was an emerging trading post between the East and West markets. You hear a lot about 50 years of diplomatic relations this year, but this year also marks the 180th year of the first American Consulate General here. His name was Joseph Balestier. Some of you might have ridden on that road around here. What some of you might not know, and that you know our history, in addition to being the first Consul General here, he was also Paul Revere's son-in-law. And those of you who go to the National Museum will see the Revere Bell. There's about 80 Revere bells in existence, and there's only one outside the United States, and it's here in Singapore. Also, one of our first entrepreneurs traded for the first time with Singapore. So I'm going to ask a question. I'm not going to do a lot of audience participation until the Q&A. Does anyone have any idea, and if you've heard this from me, you don't get to say it. I see a couple of people shaking their hands there. Does anybody have any idea what the United States' first export to Singapore was? It was ice. Big blocks of ice taken from the mountains of Vermont, put on a ship in Massachusetts, because there certainly wasn't a lot of ice in this region. From that beginning, we now went to where we are today. After ice, oil and kerosene discoveries in this region brought more traders and businessmen from the United States, leading to the first marketing of kerosene by our oil companies. Today, we've certainly expanded beyond ice and kerosene, and the United States is very proud of its title as the largest single investor, as you heard, with significant investments going back decades, long before Singapore was a sovereign nation. ExxonMobil, the single largest foreign investor in Singapore, has sunk over $15 billion into Singapore over the years. We have 3,700 American companies that have operations here in Singapore. Many of them base their regional headquarters here. I'm sure some of you either work or have worked for them. And I believe that American businesses are hands down the best companies to have contributing to your economy. For one, our companies create jobs for locals. Among our biggest firms here, on average, 80 to 90% of their staff are local Singaporeans, which is counter to many of the misconceptions about how foreign companies operate here. In fact, just looking at our 10 largest companies, it would probably surprise you to hear that the number of jobs created by those just 10 firms is roughly half of Singapore's entire civil service. But our companies also procure locally, invest locally, support education initiatives in local schools, and contribute thousands of hours to community service under our commitment to corporate social responsibility. Just this last weekend, I joined hundreds of staff from our U.S. businesses in Singapore in what we call Corporate Community Day, a day of marathon service projects around the island benefiting Singaporeans. I don't know the numbers from this year, but last year we had over 60 discrete events where we touched the lives of over 2,000 Singaporeans. This year, participating with us were Minister Tan Chuan Jin, as well as Senior Ministers of State Maliki bin Osman, as well as Mayor Loh. It's the first time we've had that level of participation. Together, Singapore and the United States have also worked closely to advance the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It started here in Singapore as the 4 Ps. Through TPP, we send a strong message that the high standards are important for trade and regional growth. The TPP builds a strategic economic architecture that anchors our country with partners across the Pacific, and we expect the highest standards of the TPP will positively influence future trade agreements in the region, not just for the 12 countries that are signing on today, but the effect on what our companies will do with where they invest, where IP protection and rule of law are guaranteed, will change the behavior and make our companies and Singaporean companies more competitive in the region. Our economic relationship has certainly expanded immensely, benefiting both from our countries and this region. Looking back on the progress of the last 50 years, we have cooperated in other important areas, including overcoming some significant challenges. In 1966, as Singapore took its first determined steps as a nation, the United States grappled with some struggles of our own, including a civil rights movement that would transform the United States, and the Vietnam War, which created a huge rift in my country. 50 years ago, large parts of the U.S. were still segregated by race, while Singapore was wrestling with its own delicate racial and religious strife. Since then, we have both made significant progress to advance racial and ethnic harmony, promoting the values of diversity and equality for all. These values shared by both of our national identities by virtue of the unique immigrant nation that we are. Of course, neither of our nations are perfect. We have many challenges ahead and injustices to address, and it is never healthy to rest on one's laurels. But what makes our nation's future strong and bright is our superior ability to continually evolve and improve. Since both the U.S. and Singapore value the concept of uniting diverse people, we're able to harness a wider range of contributions. We're able to adapt to a future challenge and remain nimble and responsive to change in a way that many of our competitor nations are not. As part of this partnership, we've conducted military exchanges with Singapore for many years. There are more than 1,000 Singaporean personnel today and every day in the United States. It's a testament to our mutual trust and shared security commitment. There are more Singaporeans studying in our military academies and war colleges than the rest of Asia combined. Let that sink in for a moment. The United States has used Singapore's military facilities to maintain a presence and support the security of this region. We're very proud to, with our partners, have maintained the security and safety of the sea lanes here for the better part of the last 70 years. And the countries of this region have all been able to grow and prosper because of that security. Our mutual commitment to peace and stability in the region led us recently to sign an enhanced defense cooperation agreement to expand military, policy, and strategic exchanges. And this is the nimble I was talking about before. The agreement also includes collaboration in new areas like humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, and cybersecurity. We also cooperate closely to overcome the challenges of terrorism, a global threat to peace and freedom everywhere. Singapore was the very first country in all of Asia to join the coalition battling ISIS. And your country has put incredible real resources on the ground to assist in that effort of now over 65 countries. We're not only working together on the front lines of the fight, but we also exchange intelligence and best practices to counter violent extremism and radicalization domestically. It's also important for me to mention that our partnership between Singapore and the United States goes far beyond economics and security. We also benefit from cultural and education exchanges. Today, there are more than 7,000 Singaporeans studying in secondary schools, colleges, and universities across the United States, and over 22% of all Americans studying in Southeast Asia study right here in Singapore. Singapore and the United States have a plethora of common goals, and most gratifying to me, we have an increasingly common mutual affection. Singapore's modern, prosperous, harmonious nation developed despite limited resources. Its successful development was made possible because Singapore invested in its people and forged partnerships with like-minded countries like the United States. Over the past 5 decades, the United States and Singapore have created ties that have significant reach and impact in this region. The United States has been a Pacific nation, trading, investing, living, and securing Asia for over 2 centuries. For us, being a friend and partner to the nations of this region is not a matter of convenience or passing preference. We are linked to Asia because it's in our core national interest and a key to a prosperous and peaceful future. One of the craziest questions I get is about whether or not the United States' commitment to Asia is long-standing or goes beyond any particular administration. And with this region having 525 million people in the middle class, and that number projected to be 3.2 billion by the year 2030, which we're closer to than we are the year 2000, I ask rhetorically back, where else would we be? This is where we will be developing apps together, curing cancer together, going to Mars together, and doing art together. This is our core national interest. It is not about any other country or any other region. You can look at any other region in the world, and they do not have the numbers that we have here, nor the long-standing presence that we have. And Singapore will continue to be that platform and that friend as our strongest partner in our engagement with Asia. We've come a long way over 50 years, but of course, neither of our nations are perfect, as I mentioned. We still have many challenges ahead and areas of improvement in both countries. But our mutual interest, our willingness to adhere to rule of law, and to establish models for inclusive growth and integration will continue to serve our countries well. I can tell you that even in my little more than 3 years' time here, we have learned a lot and dispersed that knowledge throughout our country from Singapore. I'd like to think that we have been a similar friend. As we look ahead, I'm confident the United States' contribution and commitment to Southeast Asia will only grow further, and our close relationship with Singapore will help ensure the security, stability, and prosperity of this region. I have many proud moments in my professional life, but being in the Oval Office with Prime Minister Lee and President Obama and seeing the true affection and friendship made me so proud to be even a small part of this story. Thank you for your kind attention. And with that, I'll turn things over to Jeffrey, and please fire away. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for sharing with us your views on celebrating 50 years of partnership between the United States of America and Singapore. I'm sure you're burning with questions now. And to facilitate the next part of the program, we have Mr. Jeffrey Koo on stage to be the moderator for the Q&A session. Mr. Jeffrey, please.
Good evening, everyone. Again, so firstly, the house rules. Okay, members, guests who wish to speak, please identify yourself. Of course, coming up to the mic here, and to ensure that the meeting, the dialogue proceeds well. Please keep your questions to questions and to 2 minutes and not too long comments. If you are longer than 2 minutes, the bell will sound. Longer than that, you'll find that the mic might just be switched off.
Hardcore. All right.
Okay, as for mobile phones, please keep them silent. Fire away, please. First question.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your delivery. I am Adrian Villanova, but I've got nothing to do. I'm a Singaporean. I've got nothing to do with a colorful character in Manila. Okay. Now, my question is, we, as a business consultant, we are concerned about what's going to happen to the TPP. As you know, the two presidential candidates are not in favor. And also, there are problems within the 12 countries, not Singapore. Now, do you think that if there is a President Clinton, that she will revise this TPP? You are in the Democratic Party, you would probably have some insight into this. Maybe in a reform way, because this is very important to us, because my clients are all saying, what's going to happen? Not only in Singapore, but Malaysia and the rest. So that is my question. What is going to happen to the TPP? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Is this mic okay? Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. First off, I happen to believe that TPP will be passed before the end of the year, before we inaugurate our next president. We will know that, I think, very soon after the election as to whether or not it gets scheduled for a vote. And I think that if I was a candidate who understood the value of the deal but wanted to tweak it, I would want it on someone else's ledger. So everything bad that happened could be President Obama's fault, and anything good that happened, he or she fixed it. So I've been doing a lot of outreach, and I will say that I think all of the 12 countries, ourselves included, and Singapore included, could do more to help get passed. So I would caution any Singaporean to say, we're fine, and Malaysia needs to do more, Vietnam. Every country, I can say, could do a little bit more, and us included. So I want to throw that out there. But I do feel pretty confident that if we get a vote, we have the vote. Not to get too far in the weeds, but the Trade Promotion Authority vote was actually a much harder vote than TPP, because Trade Promotion Authority was an abstract vote. Now we have a deal. And frankly, it's a pretty strong deal for a multilateral deal. It's certainly not as strong as a bilateral, but it includes labor protections that have never been there before, environmental protections that have never been there before, data protection, which is a new phenomenon. So I actually, given the deal, excuse me, that I thought was going to come out 4 years ago when I was preparing to come into this job, it's a better deal. So we have the vote because we know who voted for TPA. The question is whether it can get to a vote. And I can tell you the President has a full court press on it. I've been calling members of Congress either early in the morning or late in the evening to give them my view. Well, I have this job because I help Democrats. I'm very proud of the fact that I've tried to do this job in a very nonpartisan way. But I have been a helpful voice on some folks on the Democratic Party because of my history, that I actually support this, and as someone who I think it'd be hard to take my credentials away in that regard. So I think it's going to pass. I think it's going to pass before the end of December. I think a lot of people who are giving you opinions don't really understand how the process works. I don't mean you. I mean, the folks that we have, I can tell you, I won't name the person, but a friend of mine who is someone who used to be in government came here and met with and has friends with your members of your cabinet. And by the time he left, after the cabinet of Singapore believed that the TPP was doomed. And this person doesn't have any special insight for at least 2.5, 3 years. So I'm like, I'm talking to congressmen. They're not believing me, but they're believing some guy that, you know, used to have a voice. So I had some damage control to do, because people want to give their opinion. But I believe, personally, strongly, and fervently, that it will get called up for a vote, and when it gets called up, it'll get passed.
Thank you. Good to hear that TPP is not peaceful.
I will say that's a contrarian point of view, right? Because I think you have a lot of people who aren't talking to members of Congress, aren't talking to the White House, aren't talking to Senate staffers from the Republican Party who are the ones that actually have to bring to the floor, as we are. They're only seeing campaign rhetoric, not the actual the sausage being made.
Any more questions from the floor?
Your Excellency, my name is Koh Chin Hua, NUSS member. From the vantage point of the position in Singapore, do you think the Asia pivot awakened the Chinese dragon to make claims in the South China Sea and then make friends with the Southeast Asian nations?
That's a tack question, and there's some of the specifics of this I'm not going to get the dates right, but the short answer is no, and the evidence would not bear out that the rebalance to Asia had anything to do with it, because it had been announced for about 2.5 years before there was any move into the South China Sea or any talk of 9-dash line. So I think it's a convenient rear-view mirror explanation for some behavior that is quixotic and not helpful to the stability of this region. Frankly, I think it would be arrogant on my part to say why another sovereign nation is doing anything. So that's it. But I'm open to suggestions, as Singaporeans are great about doing, is trying to explain us to China and China to us. This might be one that I would love to get some insight on. If someone can give me a reason for the claims in the South China Sea other than domestic politics in China, because I don't see it. They have no strategic ability in an actual military exchange. They are increasing tension with trading partners that China requires as they move to a more consumer-driven economy. We don't know what's going to happen in the Philippines, but even still, I wouldn't call that the same kind of growth and development partnership that a country would want as they expand their influence. So all I can tell you is what we'll do, which is do what we've always done. We're going to fly, sail, and operate everywhere that international law allows us to do, as we've done for 70 years. And, 2 years ago, when the reports were that there may be howitzers on some of the islands, that doesn't affect our ship. You're not intimidating. And we had 2 aircraft carriers at the same time out there. We had 55 fighter jets on an aircraft carrier, which is half of the entire Air Force of Australia. And those are Navy pilots. That's not even talking about our Air Force. So our job is to keep this region for everybody safe, secure, and calm. It's better for us. It's better for the countries in this region. But China has got a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities. But if you look at where the conflicts are going to come globally over the next 100 years, it's going to be food security, water security, and energy security. And those are all challenges that China is addressing, but has a long way to go. And then you got the demographics and all the other things. So I can't explain why they're doing it. I can only tell you what we're going to do, which is what we've always done. I am concerned about commercial traffic being impeded. One of the things I've learned since the drop of oil, which is surprising, and some of you might be in the industry, is that when oil goes down, it's more expensive to ship, which seems counterintuitive because you think you're paying less for fuel, but I guess commodities in general go down, and so they are running on such a thin margin, and there have been cases where the Chinese have interpreted this very extended exclusive economic zone and have told tanker ships to change their course, which that costs money. And it's not, funny enough, they haven't told an American shipper not to do that. So it's countries that don't have the backing that our companies. So that's an issue. And the one thing that you can always say that even if we weren't getting along in Russia during the Cold War, we never stopped them from using the sea lanes that we happen to control. As long as they behaved and as long as we behaved, that was fine. So it's a concern. It's a concern, I think. But we're going to do what we've always done. And as I said, our future is tied to this region. So it's not like we can pick up sticks and go. But on your first point, absolutely not. If you look at the actual TikTok, there was an article by a commentator named Bill Hayton 6 months ago when there was that claim that came out of, I think Fu Yang actually made this argument. And then he went back and basically annotated, here's all. Beyond that, I would say that the rebalance to Asia was happening long before this administration of my mind. It's happening organically through our businesses. The gravitational pull of Asia was pulling us here. I think the president understands Asia broadly and Southeast Asia specifically because not just of his time here as a child, but his mother worked in this region for over 20 years in anthropology. And I often say to people when they ask why is he so bound here, when you sit in Hawaii, you're not looking at Africa, you're looking at Asia. This is part of who he is. So I think he added some things to accelerate our engagement here and binding us further. But this was happening, it was going to happen. I think the difference between our system, which confuses a lot of people, is most countries in the world, particularly in this region, your central government plays a huge role in your country. America has survived for 240 years, many times in spite of of Washington, not because of it. And we go through our businesses and our people and our cultural exchanges, our academic exchanges, and I think that's been happening for a long time.
Ambassador Wagar, thank you for illuminating this course on the relationship between Singapore and the US for the past 50 years. And it's heartwarming to know that it in fact goes back 150 years to Paul Revere's son-in-law, and he left that bell behind here. My name is Bill Wan. I'm working on a solution to global warming. And finding that solution is my passion. Global warming is a serious problem and an urgent one. In your talk, you mentioned that in the next so many years, maybe 30, 40 years, you'll be working with us together to find a cure for cancer, to go to Mars. But you have not mentioned fighting global warming. Now, global warming, if we go past the 2 degrees, we are going to meet climate catastrophes, and we have already reached that 1 degree level. So we have 1 more degree to go. That's when we will meet those climate monsters. I say monsters because it's almost November, and in your country you celebrate Halloween. But that 1 degree took us since, I think, about 1960 when it started warming. 1960 to now, it's about 55 years, and that brought us to this 1 degree. Carbon dioxide we started discharging carbon dioxide at a low base in 1960 to what it is now. And now we are discharging carbon dioxide at this very high level. So that next 1 degree is going to be reached in less than 55 years. It's not going to take the same 55 years as the first 1 degree.
Bill, sorry to cut you here, but somewhere within that, I guess there's a question.
Yes.
Could we get to the question? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. So, with global warming, I know in the US, this topic can be here and there, and neither here and neither there. Half the people in the US, including half the leaders, may not even believe.
That's not. You're hearing the loudest, but a tiny percentage.
Okay. So instead of asking you what the US will do, may I ask you about yourself? How do you yourself think about global warming, and what do you think you can do about it, personally yourself? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I did mention climate change in my talk, but I was boring myself, so I'm not sure. I'm not surprised some people might have glazed over that paragraph. This administration particularly has taken global warming, climate change is my preferred point, and normalized it. And the vast majority of Americans believe it's an issue to be attacked. Obviously, I'm very proud of President Obama's leadership on the Paris Climate Accord, but that's a start, not the end. And the only way that we were able to get there was not my boss, the president, my boss, but the person who I report through, Secretary Kerry's personal attention to get China to also agree. If the U.S. and China had not reached those accords, we would not be where we are even today. And Singapore signed it at the UN General Assembly just last month. I live in Miami. I lived through the second most devastating hurricane to ever hit landfall on this planet. As much as my house would increase in value to be on the waterfront, I don't need it to be. And these superstorms are a direct response to climate change. So I can say that American leadership is going to continue. It certainly would continue more easily under one administration than another, just in the campaign rhetoric. But the country has moved beyond just political leadership. And you've seen a lot of business leadership and NGO leadership, and Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, people like that, are putting their money where their mouth is. I would highly recommend that people in this room, because you are regional leaders, likewise take some of your colleagues to task, some of your graduates to task. Because the carbon dioxide emissions in Indonesia far outweigh most countries simply by the burning of the peat. So we want to be good partners, but no one wants an American politician or company to come into Indonesia and lecture anybody. That won't go well. But having ASEAN stand together, or APEC stand together, or the non-aligned movement stand together with Singapore's leadership, it's one thing to talk about what you're doing here. It's great, and you've done a tremendous amount, and Minister Balakrishnan, when he was in that portfolio, was a global leader, and Masagos has taken it and continued to fight for it. But we will be a partner here while we be leader in our own country and then globally in the bigger forum. But to say I think something like 70% of Republicans who are the side that you said don't believe in climate change. Man-made climate change. But I think most people will say there's no doubt there's been a climate change. The argument has been with 3 scientists out of 18,000 that said it wasn't man-made, and but there's a lot of connections in this country, for example, on that side of the aisle. And so what I would suggest is when you're talking about, a new ship coming in or a free trade agreement, that you press your leaders to make sure that climate change is on the agenda with both parties, not just one.
Good evening, Ambassador Sir. My name is Justin Hua, and a member of NUSS. Now, regarding my question, I just want to go and ask, do you have any concern about ASEAN's legitimacy being called into question, particularly after with recent events like the Philippines new president going on an about face on his own foreign policy, as well as the recent events, and also like the recent ruling regarding about the South China Sea.
Thank you for that. And you know, I believe, and our country believes in the centrality of ASEAN. It's a frustrating organization that runs by consensus, but those who look to it as what it is not, I think, are missing the joke. ASEAN, I think, as an entity, has been a huge reason for the essential stability, since 1968, 1969, of this entire region. Having that ability and form is taught. Now, I think that people sometimes want it to be the EU, but I don't think the EU wants to be the EU right now. So I think people forget that before there was an EU, there was the Economic Community, EC, which was a much more similar entity to ASEAN, and I think in many respects people might wish they could go back to that. It was a valid, for them, a half step, but it's here. But there are some concerning trends. Some of the dialogue partners, I mean, let's be clear, when China is trying to negotiate this code of conduct, the reports that have come out says that, well, ASEAN will say ASEAN and China. China says, no, we want to do it all bilaterally, as opposed to as an entity. And that goes against the core tenet that we have, that ASEAN is crucial as a platform. Not coming out more strongly in favor of the ruling after the tribunal is understandable in the context of how it happened, because Duterte was there, Philippines, who was the claimant, who was the winner, was not they themselves pushing it. So it kind of puts the other 9 countries in ASEAN in an awkward spot, the one country wasn't. But this region has gone through, just as ours has, different leaders at different times and has survived. I remind people when you talk about the Philippines, this is a guy who got 38% of the vote. Now that's relatively high for a Philippines election, I grant you. But at the end of the day, that means 62% didn't vote for him. And the people that voted for him on a domestic agenda, from what I can tell. Crime. And the fact that after he got inaugurated, he rolled out this foreign policy, which if someone can explain to me what it is today versus yesterday, I'm happy to hear it, because he said some things as he was getting on a plane in Japan, where yesterday he said that, you know, he's not going to do anything with the alliance with the United States, and today he said he'd like us all out of there in 2 years. I'm not an expert on their system, but I do believe they have a Supreme Court and Senate that probably have something to say to that, but it's a domestic country's issue. But ASEAN will survive as long as they stay together. There's been some concerning moments with some of the ASEAN partners, perhaps not believing as fervently as other countries in the centrality of ASEAN, but Singapore is not one of them. And Singapore has always used these multi-national forums to kind of punch above their weight. And ASEAN is one of those, probably the best opportunities. People forget that Prime Minister Lee is the second longest serving head of government in all of Asia. Behind only Cambodia. No one's picking up the phone asking that guy for anything. So, you know, when Prime Minister Lee walks into a room, you know, Joko we respect him, Xi Jinping respects him, Modi respects him, Najib respects him. And that has allowed Singapore to have not just an outsized role on specific issues, but really forming what the norms should be within the organization. So I'm optimistic that for the remainder of Prime Minister Lee's time in that role, Singapore will prosper. And I know every single one of your members of cabinet, and we have some pretty incredible leaders here, and I don't see that changing. So I think ASEAN's going to be fine, but that doesn't mean it's going to be always on a straight line. Nothing ever is.
Any more questions?
I'm Johnny Tan, a member of the NUSS Management Committee. Your Excellency, I have followed your U.S. presidential debates in the last 3 series. Also listened to some of the interviews conducted by CNN with the party supporters and the political commentators. I know tonight's dialogue is not about domestic politics, but it's got implications to the region. I think I have a lot of respect for the U.S., for what it has done for the people of America as well as the rest of the world. But I was rather disappointed to hear some of the things that have been said during the debates. And instead of focusing on plans and policies and future of the nation, although there was some discussion, but a lot of focus has been on character attack on the candidates. Now, I'm not sure whether you will comment on that, but you are very welcome to do so. My question is, based on what we've heard so far, what is your view on the potential impact of the intended foreign policy as expressed by the two presidential candidates on the rest of the world, including Singapore? Obviously, the two candidates have very differing views. I think they are very different, and perhaps you would like to share your take on each of them. Thank you.
I will do everything but that last bit as much as I would love to. The only mistake Jeffrey made in my introduction was he said I was born in the United States. I wasn't. I was actually born in Canada, and I'm an immigrant to the United States. And while I'm not an obvious immigrant, I'm very proud that America gave me the opportunity to get an education there, start a family there, build a business there, and participate in our political process. It's very, very humbling to be in this role as an immigrant. So to hear anyone, whether a supporter or candidate for anything, not understand that absent a refugee situation, immigrants, every single time, 100 out of 100 times, are a net benefit to a country's economy, even if they may strain cultural ties. In the longer run, every country that is accepted and is open to immigrants is better for it in every way, shape, or form. So when I hear anyone talking down what I think is the strongest aspect of the United States, not just from a personal reason, but it gives our competitive advantage, it's upsetting to me. I also think the way I was raised, manners matter. And I don't think, quite candidly, and I don't think that there has been a moral equivalency on both sides. I think that, if I've watched 8 years of the person I helped get elected endure some comments that I've never heard any other president have. So you can make your own assessment as to why that's the case. But I think, manners matter. And after 9/11, our country rallied around George Bush. And I'm proud of that. And I don't know that if the same thing happened under President Obama, we would have seen that. But I think our country is going through a change that makes some people fearful. I think the benefits of the recovery have been uneven. And I think it's incumbent not just on our government, but on our people more broadly to help folks share in that prosperity and have the American dream realized and be available to everybody. And I think that's the one thing that binds Singapore and the United States in a way I don't think there's any other country in the world that has it. So I once had lunch with someone here that you'd all know if I brought his name up, but I won't. And he said, Kirk, I've always found it interesting that the United States has this tight connection with Singapore where they're much more natural friend and ally and platform would be Australia. And I said, number one, that's racist, because we think we all look alike. Number two, the similarities between Singapore and the United States, that's unlike every other country in the world. We believe in equality of opportunity. Every other country, the country I was born in, Canada, Australia, Europe, they believe in equality of outcome. They want to look at a screen and say, how many people 40 make this much, how many people 60 make that much, and all of that. We say, if you have a ladder and don't take it, then shame on you. Now, we can argue whether or not there's enough ladders, and there sure isn't. But I'm proud of that in our country. So any conversation that denigrates that is upsetting to me, and I don't think it's showing you anywhere near the best and actually the most normal of Americans. Beyond that, I was on a TV show a couple of years ago, Challenge Asia. And the title of the show was How Will America Handle Being Number 2? So half my embassy says, you can't go on that show. And I said, you're darn right I'm going on that show. And the talking head, who you know, Kinnear, who's the toughest interview in town, smart as a whip, ambassador, America's had a good run. The next Apple, the next Microsoft is going to come from China, not America. I said, no, it won't. Oh, how can you be so good? I said, because if you walk into Apple tomorrow, and you go into a room of 100 people, maybe 50 of them are American. But the other 50 are the best and brightest from around the world that are attracted to the United States because of our educational system, because of our business ecosystem, and our fun and our freedom and the ability to be who you want to be. We're the only country on the planet that has a citizen of every country on the planet that lives there. So if our government or our businesses or our academic institutions are going to do business in Poland or Colombia or Vietnam, chances are someone in an organization that's from there has a cultural connection. No other country has that competitive advantage. Our diversity is our strength. So I think the vast majority of Americans know that. I'm not going to say that this campaign is not something that we're going to have to address and reassure many of our friends and partners around the world. But if we can get through some of the damage that's done to our reputation with the Iraq and Afghanistan intervention, we'll show who we are. The most stressful hour of my time in this job was an hour with Lee Kuan Yew. And I've met, President Obama is a friend of mine. I've spent a lot of time with President Clinton, spent some time with Henry Kissinger. I've never been as nervous in my life. And he was not in the best of health at that point, so he would take pauses. So you didn't know if you were supposed to speak or not. So for an hour and 15 minutes, he would say, and that was really stressful. Because I felt I was being tested, educated, product. But at the end of that, he says, most people here don't appreciate America's ability to continually reinvent itself. And that's what you have with us. And it has changed the way I try and talk about who we are and what we do. When you look at America, I think you look at creativity, innovation, diversity, and fun. I can name you any other country on the planet. You can't name all those four. And it's what gives us our secret sauce. But we will survive after this, but it has been difficult. I've come to quote Winston Churchill almost every day for over a year, which said, America always does the right thing after exhausting all other options. I think that's where we are. So 2 weeks from tonight, it will be over.
Ambassador Wagar, my name is Khushru Dastu. I'm glad somebody started the dialogue on the elections. For the rest of the world, they look at the current campaign as a soap opera. The extent of insults, personal accusations, it's gone to a low which has never been experienced at least I've never heard of in any developed country going that far. The world looks on US as a model, and I'm just wondering, isn't there an election commission or some authority that establishes certain basic standards, a certain decorum that should be observed during the campaign? Or I know it's a country for free speech, but there's a limit to where it should go to and how it gets carried away.
Well, I'm going to disagree with the concept that no other country goes through this. I have the experience in the late 80s as an intern college student, going through an election in London. That's when Neil Kinnock, I was working with the Liberal Democratic Party, and Neil Kinnock was there, and I believe from the cars, people were shouting out, "Stop the rot, step on a trot," because he was Trotskyite. And then, of course, the whisper campaigns about many things that went on both sides, and David Cameron, Tony Blair, and all of that. The difference is the spotlight's on. Y'all are watching, right? There's been, our elections are messy. Democracy is loud and messy. We believe in, I was a trial lawyer, litigation attorney, and we believe in adversarial court, and that's the way to find truth, and that's letting people both in court or in politics take the bark off each other allows people to make an informed choice. This has been different. I get that. But I do believe, let's see how far I can say this so I'll get myself in trouble. So I can answer this differently in 2 weeks. I do believe in the American people. We've seen some people who had very nasty profiles in Congress lose primaries just this year. I think it's up to the voters to reward civility and punish lack of it. I think you're going to see probably a self-examination on how candidates are chosen, probably in both parties, but one's a little bit more acute than the other. And if you don't mind me delving into my political nerd hat for a minute, this is what always gets my embassy staff nervous, but I think I'm okay on this. I've done politics for close to 30 years. That's why I have this job. And I did it as a volunteer, never made $1 off it, never made $1 off government. And each party over the last 50 years have had moments of catharsis and rebirth. Goldwater, Mondale Dukakis, have changed how what the party focused on and how they delivered their message. And so I was at a lunch not too long ago where someone was talking about how the Republican nominee was chosen to beat a weak field. And I said, well, that's kind of true. But the reality is the system did not allow for more moderate voices in it. So for example, there's some great Republicans that are mayors and governors right now. But Brian Sandoval, who is the governor of Nevada, which Nevada was one of the worst states hit after a financial crisis, and has come back roaring, he believes he'll pass the citizenship. She's got no chance getting through a Republican primary. Zero. Susana Martinez, a Hispanic woman, former Attorney General, she's the governor of New Mexico. She'd be up by 20 points right now. But she believes in a right to choose, a woman's right to choose. Zero shot. So the question is not who came up through these 16, 17 candidates. It's who do you allow control who picks your candidate. And I can tell you, as someone who's been active in the Democratic Party, the people who chose Mondale and Dukakis got diluted to be more accessible to more economic populism, but fiscal responsibility, that I think was the hallmark of the Democratic Party in the 90s. And I'd like to say that's still the same. I'm sure there's people who disagree with that. But I've tried very hard to not be partisan in this job because 80% of the Americans that live here are Republicans. They're finance and energy, right? And I'm very proud to represent all of America here, and I want them to know that I'm their ambassador too. But they also still believe in a mythical animal called a moderate Republican. And I think you have a chance of catching a unicorn on the way home and finding those these things. So, there's going to have to be some self-examination. They tried it after the last election. Reince Priebus, who graduated from my law school a couple years behind me, the chair of the Republican Party, University of Miami graduate, he did this whole autopsy about reaching out to women, Hispanics, millennials, had a whole thing. Hasn't worked out. So we'll see where it goes. But we'll be fine. I mean, when it comes to our engagement in this region, I don't think the CEO of Exxon is picking up the phone and asking Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, or Donald Trump anything about where they invest and how they invest. I don't think Mark Zuckerberg particularly cares what Barack Obama or Donald Trump thinks about what he is and isn't doing. And that's the genius of our engagement and our involvement. The United States is the largest foreign direct investor in Southeast Asia, more than the next 3 countries combined. China's number 5 on that, right? But no one knows that. When I got out here 3 years ago, the narrative was we're getting our butts kicked all over Southeast Asia. Why? Because some of our competitor countries show up with a huge check, have a press conference, and everyone knows about it, whether or not those deals actually happen. We do it through Harley, we do it through Coca-Cola, we do it through Microsoft, and no one sees the benefit we've done. But over the last 50 years, we've probably trained close to 50 million citizens of ASEAN and put their entire families in the path of middle class. We don't get credit for it, we don't take credit for it. So I try and change that a little bit. But we'll be fine. But the answer is no. We need to be loud. And the question is, do we punish people for going outside the bounds of decency But we should do that in any society.
Okay, maybe before, let me ask a question first before.
Yeah, you should get one. You should get one.
Let me get one.
You should get
Because
one.
I did my work, I was reading the stuff about you and Bak Kut Teh,
Ah, yeah.
yeah. So, we were wondering, I mean, you have been here for 2 years.
Yep.
In terms of Singapore brands, food, and all, where do you see Singapore brands entering the US market and the value of them entering the US market?
Well, great question. I think that the perceived tyranny of distance is real, right? I mean, it's thankfully we now have 2 different airlines that have direct flights to the United States as of last weekend. Singapore Airlines is starting. There's now, I think, 35 American cities that can get to Singapore on 2 flights instead of 3 as of June when United started their inaugural flight. But it is far, believe me. I've got to go back to the U.S. for my 6th trip this year, and I'm dreading it. It's tough. Let me kind of take your question and spin it, because I don't want to. I do think that the American economy, based on the reforms that happened, is by far the most stable economy in the world. And what frustrates me is my Singaporean friends that invest there, particularly in real estate, things like that. They'll go to San Francisco, LA, or New York, but the thought of them going to Dallas gives them highs. We've got to change that, because that's where the real opportunity is. But more than that, I think that Singaporeans, particularly the newer graduates, but really more broadly, have to stop thinking of London and San Francisco and New York as the preferred place and start thinking of Bangkok, Jakarta, Yangon, Ho Chi Minh. If someone wanted to ask me what my biggest surprise about this job is that there are not more Singaporeans running businesses in the business community around ASEAN. ASEAN by 2025 is going to be the 4th largest economy in the world. And this country has competitive advantages in education, work ethic, global DNA that was infused. It's been a port for a couple of centuries, but Lee Kuan Yew obviously saw the value of that. The cabinet back then saw the value of it. And, the government supported companies like Keppel, ST Engineering, you name it, know that, certainly having a stake more broadly, but they have it in this region. And I find it fascinating that there's not more taking advantage of it. The jobs on multinationals, not just American multinationals, are regional in nature. And if you don't have regional experience, how one could think they deserve those jobs is beyond me. And I had a really uncomfortable conversation. We had a dinner for the graduates of West Point. Came to my house a couple of summers ago. And so this guy's still in the military, so he wasn't talking about himself. He was there, and after a couple of glasses of wine, he said, "Ambassador, I have to tell you, the foreign talent thing is a real problem. I have a friend of mine who was up for a regional job, an ASEAN job with Goldman Sachs, and he lost it to a Brit, and that's just not right." And not thinking anything of it, I said, "Oh, where does he work in ASEAN?" He says, "Well, he hasn't." I said, "Well, how could you possibly think he's qualified?" He goes, "Well, he did everything right. He was a presidential scholar, da-da-da." And I was like, "How old's your friend?" He said, 42. I said, "Let me tell you something. I'm not trying to be rude here, but there's no one in America who's 42 who's going to tell you about the grades he got when he was 22. It's not going to happen." And he said, "Well, the government never told me that." I said, "All right. Well, enjoy the job you have, but you're not going to be a director or a leader or valuable, And so the world is smaller. Facebook, Twitter, cheap flights. And I think the younger generation of Singaporeans and all of ASEAN are more interconnected. And I think Singapore is going to take a disproportionate piece, more than their fair share of benefit from the growth of ASEAN. But it has to be something I think the people here, the leaders, the mentors have to say, if you don't like the job you're going here, why don't you're straight out of school, you don't have kids, you don't have a mortgage, go to Yangon for a couple of years. You'll be more marketable. And then I think that the opportunity, the U.S. will see interesting reforms.
Great advice.
My name is Sue, an USS member. Well, I think the US election campaign probably is the most followed up by a lot of people in the world. My question is, the whole election campaign lasts more than a year. And the amount of money they spend, each candidate, is so much that we can't imagine. Do you think in your lifetime that this system will be evolved to be simplified, like most countries in the world, that in democracy? Like Singapore, you take about three weeks for the election campaign, and you are limited to spend certain amount per voter, right?
I just want to be clear. I want to be very honest here. So you think the Singapore model of election is better than the American election?
No, I'm not.
No, I'm serious. I'm serious.
I'm just saying that
I want to know what I'm working with here.
It's the quite unimaginable that you take 1.5 years to be elected as a president, and you sit for 4 years.
So
I mean, this is something which I cannot understand. Over the years, has been long
so whether people are watching or not, the first vote was, I think, even later this year, was in February. So it's technically a 7-month process. And I think Bobby Kennedy announced in April when he ran in 1968, and sadly was still in June, but he was going to be the nominee, and so probably would have been the president this year. So the election itself is, 9 months, 8 months. And I think it's important. We don't have a national election. I think many people misunderstand that. We have 50 statewide elections. In the state of Florida, where I'm from, we have 11 media markets. 11. And to go on TV there costs $2 million a week. Okay? The last election I was involved in was 2012. Both candidates combined raised and spent $2 billion. Do you know how much the potato chip industry spends on advertising a year? $3 billion. So I think that people who have your point of view need to look at the context of what we spend selling Coke, selling hamburgers, selling Kleenex. And if we're talking about the person who could stop or start a global world war, or is, I always worry about this, and please, the one thing I know about Singaporeans is you're candid to a fault, like, believe me, I get off a plane, my driver will say, "Sir, you've gained weight." I say, I don't need that level of candor. I really don't. So I don't want this to sound arrogant, because I'm very humble not of myself, and I also know the warts that we have as a country. But there is no other global superpower, right? Like by a long range, right? If a nuclear disaster happens in Eastern Europe, they're going to call us. If famine happens in Africa, they're going to call us. If a hurricane happens in the Philippines, they're going to call us. If a coup happens in Argentina, they're going to call us. I kind of want that person who's leading that responsibility to be vetted. Now, with that level of vetting, do you get oversaturation? Oh my God, yes. There's nobody who wants this election more over than I do. Believe me. But like many things, I would say that our system is the worst in the world except for all of us. And I think that America is the least imperfect country on the planet. And I think Singapore is right up there. It's one of the least imperfect countries in the world. But that doesn't mean we've got to figure it out. But no. The changes we need, I think, are personally to take unregulated money out of it. So the people who are donating have to be voters, not corporations. Have to be American voters. So frankly, it was legal, and I did. When I was a green card resident, I was allowed to donate, even though I couldn't vote. I wouldn't have that. But that was legal, and I did it. Obviously, I would reform some of the, I think both parties are going to reform whatever, and I'd probably give some free airtime. The most important thing we need in our country is redistricting. So we don't have Democrats running, or members of Congress running in 80% Democrat districts, and Republicans running an 80% Republican, so they're only talking to the people who agree with them, and they don't have to moderate their views and hear opposing point of view. So I think we'll see some changes, but this is the ditch we dug, and then we're gonna live in it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that very last question. With that, I see Dr. Fong there, so it's time is a little bit running out. Let's give Ambassador a great round of applause for his very insightful and candid sharing with us. Thank you, man.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for a very engaging dialogue session.
Thank you.
I'd like to invite Mr. Eddie Lee on stage to present a token of appreciation to the Honourable. Thank you.